Okay, it looks like we're live. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for tuning in for our event today with Jasper Fforde and Matt Haig. We are so lucky to be joined by them. We've got Matt coming to us from Brighton, England, and Jasper from the middle of Wales. So it's a good evening to them. Hello, gentlemen. How are you?
Good.
Very well, thank you. It's nice to be somehow in Houston and in the ether. And it's good to see Jasper, because I've never met Jasper in real life, but I've loved his books for a long time. So it's an honor to be doing this with Jasper too.
Thank you.
That's great. We were talking ahead of time, and one of the nice things, very few nice things about this pandemic is the ability now to talk with people all over the world and have unusual pairings and things that might not have happened in store, and also have people watching who might not be in Houston. So without much further ado, let me get this underway. I would like to mention before I officially introduce the authors that congrats to Matt Haig for a Good Morning America pick. And we have signed book plates on the way from him. Also, Jasper sent us postcards that are signed, dated, and stamped. I don't know if you can see, but if you order a copy of either of their books, they will come with the appropriate paraphernalia. If you have any questions, pop those in the comments. I'll be back on there in just a couple minutes, glancing down at my phone occasionally so that I can ask your questions after our chat. So let's see, I had moved my bio page. Here we go. So Jasper Fforde has been writing in the comedy fantasy genre since 2001, when his novel The Air Affair debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. Since then, he has published 14 more books, several of them bestsellers, and counts his sales in millions. The Constant Rabbit is his 15th novel. He lives and works in Wales. Hello again, Jasper.
Yeah.
Matt Haig is an author for children and adults. His memoir, Reasons to Stay Alive, was a #1 bestseller, staying in the British top 10 for 46 weeks. His children's A Boy Called Christmas was a runaway hit and is translated in over 40 languages. It's being made into a film starring Maggie Smith, Sally Hawkins, and Jim Broadbent, and The Guardian called it an instant classic. He has sold over 3 million books worldwide. He's here today to discuss the #1 UK best-selling book, The Midnight Library. Hello, Matt.
Hello, very nice to be here. Thank you.
So we have already had this conversation, but before we dig into the books, Jasper, tell me about those rabbits behind you.
Well, how long have I got? Well, this painting here, I mean, if any of your viewers have seen the film Harvey with Jimmy Stewart, you'll recognize this painting. Elwood P. Dowd has a very similar painting that he produces in the film. And I thought I would like painting with me and Harvey. So I got my mother-in-law, who is an artist, to paint me my very own canvas with me of Harvey. And my friend there, Connie, looking over us. I don't know whether you can read her T-shirt, but it says, "I don't scare easily. I'm a librarian."
Nice.
It's a bit random, but you know, it's a kind of rabbit theme. So that's what it is.
Absolutely. So I like to start this because we have so many people who watch these events who don't know who the authors are. It's new to them. They don't have to make a trip to a store. They just tune in. So if you don't mind giving me an elevator pitch or a brief synopsis of the book you're here to talk about today. Matt, why don't we start with you?
Okay, well, The Midnight Library, of the title, is a library between life and death, where a woman, the protagonist, Nora, finds herself after doing something stupid because she's so fed up with her life. And each book on the shelf in the library is a version of her life if she had lived it a different way. And she can access these lives simply by opening the books that exist there. So she gets to see if the grass really is greener on the other side, and she gets to live a life free from all the regrets she had in her route life. So it's a novel about working out how to live your best life, and you know, whether things we think are mistakes that we've made in our past are truly mistakes, and you know, how to find happiness within the life we're in, I suppose. That was a long elevator pitch. I'm sorry.
No, No, it's good.
The elevator got stuck on between floors.
I tried to tell my husband earlier on in the car, we were heading home, and I said, I've got to do this event this afternoon and I'm looking forward to it. And he said, well, what are the books? I did not do nearly as well summarizing your book. So there you go. Jasper, tell us about The Constant Rabbit.
Right. Okay. So the conceit of this book is in 1965, 18 rabbits underwent a anthropomorphizing event, and they became 6 foot tall. They could talk, they could walk, they had reason, they understood their place within the biosphere, and it was just incredible. And everyone was amazed, and it's fantastic, and it's inexplicable, and welcome, and a cause for celebration. But then, as the years go by, it's 55 years later. It's 2022. The rabbits are not so welcome because they've grown in number, not a huge amount. There's about 1 million of them. It's, as I said, now 2022, and everyone's not well disposed towards rabbits. And the ruling party, UKARP, the United Kingdom Anti-Rabbit Party, wants to rehome them in Wales. Meanwhile, my protagonist, Peter Knox, who works for the Rabbit Compliance Task Force, something that you might think is not that friendly to rabbits, and it is not, he lives in the middle of Middle England, and everything is fine and perfect and dandy. But then a family of rabbits move in next door to him. The rest of the village want them out. It's a little bit tricky because Mrs. Rabbit, Connie, he was actually at university with, and they kind of had a little bit of maybe they did have a little bit of flirtation. So things get a bit complex in a sort of human rabbit world. Allegorical, science fantasy, whatever you want to look for it, but also there's a lot of sort of silly laughs in it as well, absurd too.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah, I didn't really expect a one sentence pitch for either book. So I think it's clear that in both of your new books there are fantastical elements at play. What has drawn you to the blurring of worldly and otherworldly over the years? And we'll start with Matt again.
Yeah, I don't know. Honestly, I genuinely sometimes try to sit down and start to write a realistic book. And I get to about the 3rd chapter and I get a little bit frustrated and I feel a bit claustrophobic and want to break out. I feel like when you're writing fiction, you have so many areas you can go into, so many worlds you can explore, that you can literally go where you want to. And it's a kind of waste of the freedom of being a fiction writer for me. To feel sort of confined by that. Also, I actually think sometimes when you're trying to convey something or a truth about something, like in the case of Midnight Library, I'm sort of talking about mental health quite a lot. It actually helps to step out of the, the collective sense of reality we have, and to look at things in a more conceptual way. And yeah, I just have more fun doing that. It's nice to do a job that feels like fun and that feels like a daydream. And for me, I like that space that exists between reality and fantasy. So I find that in that blurring of the line. So, start of Midnight Library, it feels very realistic. It's a world we very much recognize. And then by page 26, we're in this sort of infinite TARDIS-like library that goes on forever. And yeah, I like that. I like that sense, because there's so much of reality that we don't know and we don't share. And there's so much of our brains that we don't understand, that I feel like that space between inverted commas reality and non-reality is kind of the space a lot of us are in anyway. Sure.
How about you, Jasper?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of really on sort of Matt's page with this one. Yeah, I mean, the great thing about writing, and almost, I suppose, with movies, almost, or maybe not, the great thing about writing and the great thing about novels is that the only limit is the limit of your own imagination. And why would you not go the whole hog? And I think there's this sort of this notion of exploration as well. It's like, we still want to go back to the moon. We still want to go to Mars. And it's kind of wanting to know what's over the hill. I think this is where it all comes from. And when you're writing, that hill, that you're trying to look over is into some new space, some new exciting originality, a new way of telling stories. And for me, writing, normal books in normal realities just seems wrong, fundamentally. So whenever I'm writing, I go, okay, let's look at something new and exciting and different and tell a story in a different way. And the thing I enjoy so much about writing in sort of in fantasy or science fantasy or whatever you call it, is there are new ways you can make drama work. You can say, okay, you've got rabbits and you've got humans, and they interact in a very strange way, because of course we have this past relationship with rabbits that is kind of a bit dodgy. And how can we use that in our relationship now? And how can we perhaps tell an allegorical tale about the ways in which we treat each other? And this is what I sort of mean by a new way of telling stories. And it's like cutting through a sort of new cloth. And that's the wonderful thing about the fantasy genre, is that you can cut through a little bit of new cloth each time. And it's exciting. And yeah, why would you not do that? Why is not everybody fantasy? I don't get it. But anyway, there you go.
And also, I think if someone connects with you and your like wildest dreams that you're having and putting down on page, then it's somehow a sort of deeper connection the reader's having with the author than if they're connecting because it's a shared reality that they just recognize from the high street. It's kind of nice sometimes to connect via the dream level rather than, real level. Sorry.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, I think there's I kind of often think, or someone said that reading and writing is the closest thing to telepathy that we have. And humans have shared experiences, and we have very similar shared experiences. And when you're writing a book and you're talking to someone through the book who is like literally thousands of miles away, or even hundreds of years, possibly, you have this shared experience, and there's this bond and this link, and this is, I know exactly what you're doing about that. And yeah, it's very strange, very curious, but it's a good feeling. Someone comes up to you in the signing queue and says, when you put that little words together, I knew exactly what you meant. I knew exactly where you were coming from. And you go, yes.
Yes. And that's also why, I get frustrated with this cliche of like bookish people being these sort of antisocial or introverted people, because I feel like fiction at its best and reading at its best is like a deep level socializing. You're sort of connecting, as you say, Jasper, with someone who could have died 400 years ago, but you're having a kind of conversation or two-way thing going on, but it's just at that sort of deep imaginative level, which so I see it as the opposite. It's a way back. It's a way to connect with other people rather than to retreat from them, I think.
I can attest as a casual observer and being in the bookstore for fantasy events versus our normal just straight detective fiction events, that no fans are as enthusiastic as fantasy fans, and they are certainly not shy about spreading their love of the genre that the author's there. I mean, when we have a fantasy event, everyone sits in the audience waiting for the author, but they are talking the whole time. So yeah, I think you're right that it's this shared experience of a fictional other world that feels very not inside baseball, but shared knowledge of this insider thing. So that's interesting. So Matt, I think you've kind of touched on this already a little bit, but I read somewhere that this book was somewhat more autobiographical than How to Stay Alive. And I read the following quote that I thought was lovely. The book is, quote, about acceptance and realizing that you often have a lot more than you think, end quote. Can you talk about the origins of this parallel lives story?
Yeah, well, it's the first time in fiction that I've written sort of overtly about, with a character who has mental health issues or has at least been diagnosed with mental health issues. And, obviously, like, I've written directly about my own autobiographical experiences. I had a breakdown in my 20s. I had depression and I was diagnosed with panic disorder, and I had agoraphobia and, a whole smorgasbord of mental issues. And to be honest, I find, I have written 2 books, a non-fiction about mental health, but I find it more liberating to do so in fiction. And one of the reasons why the protagonist is female is I wanted to overtly make sure that this character wasn't me directly, externally me. And then once that was clear, I could actually be quite, put a lot of autobiographical stuff, not in terms of life events, but in terms of her sort of emotional self and those sort of suicidal feelings I'd had when I was younger, and that she's going through at the start of the book, and to explore that in a way. And so, although it is called fiction, and although, it's called fantasy in one sense, I feel like you know, it can also be real. You have to sort of, even when you're writing about whatever you're writing about the zombie apocalypse or anything, there has to be some sort of emotional reality to it. And I think that's a myth about fiction, and certainly fantasy fiction, is that it's not real. You know, it is still real because the imagination is real at the end of the day. It's just a different kind of real. And I find, you know, exploring themes which can be quite mundane about, you know, depression and mental health diagnosis, but to do it within a sort of concept novel and a fantasy concept, it's quite liberating. And it was quite sort of therapeutic for me writing about it in an abstract way. So I was often writing about myself, even though I was clearly not writing about myself. I was writing about this woman who wasn't me, who was a different age to me, who lived somewhere different to me. Yeah, but it was very freeing to get that out on the page.
And Jasper, I feel like, you know, obviously the books have completely different angles to them and they're completely different worlds. But I felt that you have a similar thing where in an allegorical novel, you can address issues of racism. So what kind of inspired you to go that direction with this book?
Well, this book kind of, I was writing another novel called Early Riser, which took a kind of time to write, and I got really badly blocked writing it, and it was hideous. But during it, it was kind of about 2016, that kind of time, and it was the Brexit vote was happening here in the UK, and I think for someone in Britain, or maybe I'll just speak for me personally. I think this was a time in which my suspicions about, you know, being British and this sense of, you know, exceptionalism that the British have about themselves, I think was sort of punctured once and for all with this kind of, you know, back to empire, go it alone sort of, we don't need Europe, isolationist sort of, and I believe personally, a xenophobic and racist agenda to what was going on. And I think that was kind of me realizing that, you know, all that stuff I was brought up with in Britain, you know, I was born in 1961, so there was still, you know, 15 years after the war ended, so there was still that sort of we won the war sort of nonsense, and you know, 2 World Wars, 1 World Cup stuff, and I think it was sort of really about that, and my character within the book, Peter Knox, is someone who is a nice guy. I mean, he's a sort of likable but a little bit spineless. And he sort of comes to the realization that he's living, you know, actually in a society that is not conducive to rabbits, and I think there's a kind of sense of what I was discovering about myself and my nation, and really the big question mark about, well, what do you do about it? What can you do? What can one person do? And that was really kind of what it was examining. But yeah, and then I finished Early Riser. And then I came back to Constant Rabbit in about I think 17, 18. I finished it in early 19, and yeah, when all the sort of nonsense about Brexit was still going on and still is going on. So you know, that really sort of cemented, you know, really what I wanted to say about it. And yeah, I mean, that's really what it's all about. But otherism, right? I mean, it's about sort of demonizing the minority other. Well, I was trying to stay away from any particular demonized other, just to sort of, it's about otherism, you know, that minority other that you despise for, you know, whatever reason, like they burrow or they're going to overbreed, or, you know, they have a vegan agenda, you know, like rabbits do, obviously. So there's quite a lot you can do with, you know, from a very allegorical point of view, and there's a few good laughs as well that you can have, you know, and it's sometimes a bit of a balance, but hopefully I sort of hit it correctly.
So I do want to issue a disclaimer to those people who are watching and think that, oh God, these are 2 really heavy books on heavy topics. It's in there, but they are absolutely wonderful. Obviously, if you've ever read Jasper Fforde, you know there's a tremendous amount of wit and humor all the way throughout. So you are not going to be lectured or anything like that. I highly recommend these books. It's just that there are some real life concepts buried in the fun. So this is my last serious question, and then we'll move on to process and some others. But I did think the timing was kind of appropriate. So despite these both being fun and engrossing reads, they do deal with hard topics. Jasper, I read a quote of yours We live in unsubtle times, and this calls for unsubtle books. It's interesting speaking with both of you today because so often authors remain apolitical. However, neither of you have gone that route. Do you want to speak about the role of the creator or the artist as a critic in the world around them? Sorry, I know it's a heavy question.
I'm gonna push Jasper in front.
Oh, you're gonna put okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, you know, I mean, it would be easy to have this sort of vastly inflated ego, but I think the best way to look at it is there are problems out there. We know there are problems out there. They have to be dealt with, and they have to be dealt with properly. And problems have been dealt with in the past. We know they can be dealt with. This is not an impossible scenario, and I think you have to look at it as a broad coalition, right? Everyone can do their part, and some people can do a huge amount because they're the right people, the right time. They have a platform, and they can make things happen, and they do a fantastic job. And these people are not me. This is not me. But we as authors can do our little bit, and whether it's a small amount or a big bit, it is doing something. And I think there is also like a cascade effect, because if I perhaps write about these issues, then I think the most that I can possibly hope is that I will cement resolve, perhaps, in people like me who have had doubts about themselves, perhaps, and their nation, wherever they live. And that's the small bit that I'm doing. So I think it's dangerous to say that, you know, that books and authors are going to change the world, because I don't think they are totally. But we can all do our little bit to help, you know, whatever it is. Just if you challenge someone, if you challenge a friend, perhaps, when they say something, then that's a little bit. And we all have to take that and understand that, you know, you can change things, but it's everybody doing as much as they can, even if it's a small amount, you know. So I think that's the safe thing to say, is that, yeah, we do what we can, but I'm not going to fool myself that my book is going to change the world, but it might just help. And if it does, it's worth writing. And yeah.
Well, I don't think you can underestimate the impact that it might make that someone reading your book who hasn't considered their own beliefs might see themselves as biased to humans in the way that you're portraying bias towards rabbits. You know, it might make a point in that person in a way that, you know, if you hadn't written that book, or Matt, you know, people may see they may get some understanding about mental illness reading your work that, you know, just on a personal level, they might not have experienced. So I would consider that a victory, you know, even if it's just one person.
Yeah, I think books actually have you know, I speak as someone who spends far too long on social media and far too much time, and I get politically angry on Twitter, and I've had arguments with people on the other side of the world. You know, I've wasted entire weekends of my life arguing with flags on Twitter with no name, and, you know, these things. And actually, you know, it doesn't, I don't think it does much. I feel like, you know, I haven't actually won anyone over that way. And I feel like actually books actually create a calmer space, a space where you can actually have room to change people's minds, and you can have a bit of nuance about things, and you can actually have a more human perspective. I mean, so much of the sort of online discourse is so confrontational, and so much of it, you know, I when I've been angry and venting about the world and certain politicians and stuff, you know, I'm thinking, is that actually making the world that much better, or is that actually contributing to the whole sort of hate machine of the internet and to Twitter's shareholder value and all of that stuff? And I actually think books, in their nature of not being interactive in the sense that you're clicking on a like button, but interactive in a sort of deeper way where you're actually contemplating and reflecting, and you're not having to answer back instantly to the author, they actually do have a space as a medium that's actually as relevant, if not more relevant now. It's kind of a kind of safe space away from that continual back and forth of like buttons and sharing and all of that stuff. So I think, you know, I would say it because I'm an author, but I do feel like books are actually relevant in terms of how they change mind. And as Jasper say, it might not change the world in the sense of, you know, changing millions of people's voting position or this and never, but you can have a deep, profound effect on a person, on a reader, and have a sort of conversation. Even if they're not getting the message you've put into the book, they might be getting another message or something that sparks something in them. And I think it's, yeah, I quite like books. Books are good.
Yeah. If I could get all metaphorical for a moment, it's like there's a collective consciousness that floats above us all. This is a sort of this is a Kurt Vonnegut sort of theory, that there's a collective consciousness that floats above us all, right? And we give into it and we pull from it, and it's, well, you know, I don't want to say the cloud because it's, you know, too much like the cloud, but this sort of collective consciousness. And what, as an author, what you kind of do is you're trying to huff it in the right direction. You know, you're putting stuff in and you're trying to move the cloud, you know, to where you want it to go. And that's kind of what you can hope to do. But yeah, as Matt says, is a much more nuanced approach to this than going on Twitter, which I can't stand. I just stay away from politics on Twitter. It just divides. It just pushes people apart constantly. But yeah, it's more nuanced. I think that's a good word for it.
Well, it's interesting because everyone has their own, you know, idea, obviously, in how much their own politics goes in their work. I was speaking with an extremely high-profile author the other day who said that he doesn't put any of it in his books, but he's extremely active on Twitter politically. So, you know, it's just interesting to see everyone's different approach. So a little bit about process, moving away from high concepts. So both of you build these worlds that are not just look at Google Maps for research. How do you keep your world building straight? Do you have cheat sheets or do you journal? How do you build your worlds?
I'm actually really, I'm not much of a planner. I should be more of a planner because it makes editing a nightmare. I don't write chronologically, for instance. I don't write from beginning to end. Often the first chapter is the last chapter I've written. And, you know, my only method, to sound a bit grand, is that I just start at where I want to, you know, the thing that's most there in my brain, the chapter that's most exciting to write, I will start that. And it's often sort of like a third of the way in. And then, my favorite quote about writing is from the French writer Françoise Sagan, and she said that she has to write in order to think. And so, you know, I can't sort of stand back and have my list of things that are going to happen. It's in the process of writing where it becomes kind of like you're on a metaphorical riverbank and waiting for the ideas. They just sort of come and suddenly you've got a blue marlin or whatever, and it surprises you. And that's my favorite thing about writing. And that's what happens in the first draft at certain moments where you actually surprise yourself and you find something because your imagination's built on itself. And I like those moments, but I don't really have I don't really plan. It's all in the editing in terms of timing and structuring those sort of things. And I'm really sloppy with timing and weather inconsistencies and that stuff. And this is why editors are so valuable, because I you know, it'll be snowing in June and it'll be, you know, it's just all over the place. So I need that. But I feel like this approach, for one advantage of it is you end up with less filler because you're not going from A to B to C to D to get there. You're writing almost like you're focusing on the dream and focusing on the thing that you want to write in any given moment, if that makes sense.
Yeah. How about you, Jasper?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm with Matt on the whole no planning thing. I tend to write by what I call my narrative dares. This is sort of, I set myself a narrative dare and then write my way out of it. So with my Thursday Next series, the first book I got published, it's Jane Eyre is kidnapped out of Jane Eyre and someone has to get her back. It's very simple. Humpty Dumpty is a police procedural. That was another one. The Early Riser was write a thriller set in a world in which people have always hibernated. So there's always just this sort of narrative dare, and the rabbit book was essentially a narrative dare. Right, you know, rabbits live amongst us. How? So where I generally kick off is I want to get the sort of the complexity of the world and the world building is as I throw all my characters together and then just have them start talking. And when I'm writing, and you know, like Matt, it's like when I'm writing, I'm working on the hoof all the time. And you start writing a scene, and then you go, ah, this would work, and oh, what would that? Hang on, that would work. And if I do this and I do that, no, that wouldn't work because of so and so. And then it all obviously has to hang together in this nice sort of, you know, lovely sort of. The thing about fantasy is there has to be a very, very clear skeleton on what it all has to have its internal logic, and it has to be a rigid internal logic. Or if it doesn't, and it doesn't have a rigid internal logic, then that is the logic, if you see what I mean. So you can actually get a bit sort of meta about it. So I started the Rabbit book with essentially putting my character, Peter Knox, who is about 50 and slightly awkward, and he's going to dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Rabbit and their two children, Kent and Bobby. And I sort of made Connie Rabbit, they're old flames, and Mr. Rabbit, known as Doc, is ex-military and slightly suspicious that Peter might have sort of, you know, might quite fancy Connie. And once you have all those little agendas, and Bobby Rabbit is a bit of a sort of, you know, sort of eco-warrior sort of person, and Kent Rabbit, the son, is just a bit surly, and you throw them all together and you start writing it, and all of a sudden everything starts to come together and sit together, and you understand the characters and the situations, and it just kind of spreads and darkens as a novel, and everything kind of begats other ideas. This happens and that happens, and oh, maybe this could happen, I could use this. And then all of a sudden, you know, the plot starts arriving, because sometimes I start writing and I don't really have a plot. I have a theme, but I don't have a plot. And then the plot arrives, and then other things sort of come in, and all of a sudden it slowly starts sort of, you know, bubbling to the surface. But it's very much a sort of, you know, just sort of firing off in all directions. And if I built a house like I built a book, I'd start with the chimney, and then like dig half the basement, and then put the window in the second floor. You know, it's that kind of thing. But it all sort of vaguely works, and then you overwrite it. It's usually my books 100,000 words, Constant Rabbit. First draft was 150,000, and then I just cut out 50,000 as I'm, you know, going through and tightening everything. And yeah, and eventually it just, you've got a book, and it's like, whoa, how did that happen? So it's a weird kind of dark art. But when you're teaching yourself to write, what you're kind of teaching yourself to write is to not really think about writing as you're writing. You're trying to teach yourself to do it intuitively, and I think this is true of any creative endeavor, whether you're, you know, playing the trumpet or sculpting or singing. You're not really thinking about it, and sometimes, you know, I'm talking to students about writing, and I've got those really good sentences, and I go, this is because they shine out like a beacon, you know, when you're looking at a paragraph. And I go, oh, this sentence, that is really good. And they go, oh, yes, it is. And I said, did you have to think that up? And they went, no, it just popped out. And they go, aha, that is where you're trying to get to. So it's this weird, strange, dark art. And it's kind of difficult to explain. You just kind of attack it and things happen, you know, and you just put it all together, and it sort of seems to work. But it is quite subtle.
Do you have any weird routines or just rituals, like certain music or a certain beverage, only write at a certain time of day? Matt?
Well, okay. I used to feel like I needed to have my own writing space, and to have, like, I bought this house because it's got a shed, and I was going to go out in the shed and going to be like Roald Dahl in my shed. And that didn't happen. And I'm a real, like, low-key writer, so I will sort of write surreptitiously on the sofa in my living room with, you know, quite a lot of noise, because we've got children in our house, and I actually kind of like noise to be there, either the radio or something, partly because I've got tinnitus. So if everything's super silent, I hear a ringing in my ear, and that's been the case since I was 18, halfway through my history A-level. It's an exam we have in the UK, and yeah, I have ringing in my ears. So I think it was, I can't remember who it was, some American author, someone like Jonathan Franzen or someone said that to write, they have to have earplugs in and everything's sort of silent around. And I can't write like that at all. So I actually kind of like having distractions. So but there'll be some noise. It's not necessarily a ritual or routine. I go for a run every morning, and that's not really a writing thing, that's more a mental health thing. And I have a lot of toast and peanut butter, and to be very British as well, Marmite. Do you know Marmite? You know what Marmite is?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Salty yeast extract. Yes.
Yeah.
I have a thin layer of Marmite, a slightly thicker layer of peanut butter on some whole grain toast. Have that a few times a day, and that's my plan. That's my creative writing course right there. Just toast and right. I know this wasn't really a question about writing routine, but the only thing that seems to be consistent with me is mornings. I work way better in the mornings. For every paragraph I will do before, say, 2 p.m., I will only sort of squeeze out a sentence in the afternoon. My brain slows down during the day. So I am a morning writer and I'm not really a morning person because I like staying up late, but yeah, I get a lot more writing done if I start the day writing.
Well, I think that Thursday Next and her world would approve of your toast for sure. So Jasper, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, similar really. I mean, I've got, a house full of kids as well, and I have an office upstairs. It's very small. It doesn't have a view. We have a great view where we are because we're in the Welsh mountains. But I don't have that view. I just have this little box room. It's about 10 foot by 10 foot, and I have my desk and I have my computer screen, and mostly the door's open. I have a bit of music on, and if the kids are around, they're chattering away, and all of a sudden I've got a 10-year-old staring at me or saying it's not fair because someone did something, and I go okay and sort it out and then come back to it. But once I find myself tunneled into that, what I'm working on, then I think there could be sort of basically sort of World War III going on, and I'd just ignore it and just sort of do my writing. The dog needs walked. I need to be walked, so that has to be done. And of course, I have to get up and sort of walk around just to sort of stretch. But yeah, again, like Matt, mornings, I'm always up very early. I do like really going up early. It's a great time of the day. Read a bit of news, and hopefully start by 6, and then then the kids obviously in a couple of hours, and then get back to it. And if I've had a really good day, by 3 o'clock, I could go, right, I deserve the afternoon off, and then I'll go and do a longer walk or do something else. But my mind's ticking over, and I'm thinking about what I worked this morning, and I'll have a nice idea that I can then attack the following day. So that's the kind of routine. But it's relentless. It's not like 2 days a week. It's 5 days a week. Sometimes if I'm really right at the end of the book where you've got all these things to do and you kind of know what you've got to do, I can be working through the weekend. I'll be doing 10-hour days for 2 weeks because it's all in your head. And if you stop for 2 days, it's like all that memory has just dropped out, and you go, where was I? What was I doing? But if you keep it in and you keep the momentum up and you carry on working, day after day after day, right at the end, that really intense writing is really important. But it's a very exciting time as well, because you're just sort of putting all those little finishing things, and it's all coming together, and you're loving it, and it's a great piece of work, or you think. So I get very much more sort of fixated with it towards the end of the writing.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for one of two scenarios: aspiring writers who are facing writing block, or aspiring writers who deal with not being able to silence their own self-criticism of their writing?
Well, yeah, I feel like on the self-criticism issue, you kind of need a degree of self-criticism, because although this thing that we call a first draft exists, where we send it off to an editor or a publisher, or if you're an aspiring writer, to an agent to try and get published, there's no such thing really as a first draft, because you kind of edit as you go along, and writing is really editing. And as Jasper said about taking out 50,000 words, it's more about what you don't include sometimes as what you do include. So self-criticism, first and foremost, is kind of a good thing to have, and it's an over amount of self-confidence sometimes would be more detrimental to being a writer than self-criticism. But having said that, you know, I totally relate to that in terms of, you know, whether you could see yourself as a writer. I can remember before I was published, I definitely would never, unless I'd have had a sort of mental breakdown, I wouldn't have actually believed being a writer was a career path that I could pursue, or that I could be a writer or have my name on a book. Those things seemed quite beyond me where I was in life. And it was only because I went through depression, which I thought would be impossible to get out of. And then I did one impossible thing by staying alive. So I therefore had this sort of newfound swagger and arrogance. And I thought, oh, well, getting a book is quite easy after sort of combating suicide or depression. So I had a new take on life. But I think you kind of need a degree of both. You need the confidence and, I don't know, I suppose it's like arrogance to feel like anyone would want to listen to your story and to have it inside you, yet enough self-awareness and self-criticism to be able to criticize it. So it's not about getting rid of that self-critical voice. It's about using it in a way which is constructive. And sometimes, you know, we all, if we're creating anything, we all create degrees of good stuff and degrees of bad stuff. And it's about being able to sieve through them both, I suppose.
How about you, Jasper?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good point. I mean, I always say that you've got to have that sense of it's being a writer is a very, very strange skill set. You know, and it's like a sort of Venn diagram where the circles are only just overlapping. You know, you have to have enough confidence in yourself to be an arrogance to be able to think that you can finish this and people can buy it. But you also have to have enough sort of you know, searing sense of self-doubt to know that what you're doing is rubbish and you have to make it better. So, you know, it's a very, very strange sort of mix of sort of I don't know, sort of mental conditions and
complicated
skills.
People,
and
right? Yeah.
Sorry?
Complicated people, writers.
I think they are, and I think they're just a little bit weirdly, just a little bit slightly damaged in some way. You know, you'll always find some you scratch the surface, and you always find you always go at the end of it. But I think the important thing is that sense of self-doubt you might have had as a child. You know, make it work for you as an author. You know, and you're thinking, you're writing this, and you're going, well, this doesn't work, and you go, it's telling me, I'm telling myself it doesn't work, and you listen to that voice, because that voice is probably right. But the thing to do, and this is actually a really good exercise to prove to yourself that you understand about editing and you understand about writing and improving, is to write something, right, and then set it aside and then read it like 3 months later and see if it looks a bit rubbish and that you can improve it. And if you can improve it, then clearly you can write. Because if you read it back to yourself and say, well, no, I think that's brilliant, and you know, don't touch a word, it's going to be fantastic, that would get the alarm bells ringing for me. But if you, even now, if I look at a paragraph in this book, I will go, I could have just improved that a little bit, and I'll just keep on editing it. Or when I do live readings, you know, and I read this, I'm actually editing it in my head and actually leaving little lines out and changing things. So, you know, you're always trying to improve it. And that is one of the, you know, the engine of being an author, is endlessly thinking you're just a little bit rubbish, a little bit crap, and you could be slightly better. And it's pushing and pushing and pushing. But it's not so much that you're just going to give up. So, you know, it's that very sort of small sort of fine kind of line. As regards writer's block, I mean, if you've got writer's block, it's just awful. I mean, it really is just awful. I don't know what to do. I mean, I just carried on writing through it, and it took me about 3.5 years. And usually I can write in a book in 100 days, and Early Riser took me 440 days. And it wasn't me not writing, it was me just writing. It was just terrible. And on the screen, I just hated it. And then very slowly, I sort of turned the corner. I started to like the book, because my relationship with the book when I was blocked was, I want this finished. I don't want it to be good. I just want it finished. I want to leave. I want to go. I want to do something else. I'm just fed up with it. But that kind of narrative dare part of me was saying, no, you have to finish this book. And I just wrote my way through it, and it took literally years. And you know, I lost a contract for another book I should have finished. It put me behind. I should have written another 3 books in between now and then, so I should have had 20 books out by now, and I've got 16, which is, you know, still okay. So it was unpleasant. I don't really have any, you know, hard and fast rules for it, other than you are not alone. This happens to a lot of authors, and you're just going to have to either put it away for 3 months, come back to it, see what works for you. But yeah, I don't really have any hard and fast, other than say I understand and it's horrible, and you may just have to push your way through it until you emerge at the other end. But don't give up. Don't give up. Keep going. It will be worth it, and it will come out at the end.
So my last question before we do crowd questions is, do either of you have a favorite scene that either was your favorite writing or your favorite as a finished product in this new book?
With me, I think, well, there's so many different scenes in the Midnight Library because she lives so many different lives. I think this section, it's not necessarily a scene, but the section I enjoyed writing most was the section where Nora is living in the Arctic Circle, and she's a glaciologist, and she encounters polar bears, and she meets another man who is also stuck between lives. And that was the most interesting because it involved research, which made me feel like a proper writer doing proper research. And it was fun research about Arctic Circle and glaciers and climate change and stuff I'm interested in anyway. And so that was probably it. But other than that, I'd say the start of it, where the Midnight Library, where she first enters the Midnight Library and envisaging that was also fun. So yeah, that was my sort of waffly answer. But yeah, two scenes.
How about you, Jasper?
Oh, there are quite a few favorite scenes, actually. I mean, I have a courtroom scene at the end, which I rather like. So there's a courtroom drama, which is very, very silly. I think I was very keen on sort of, I've never done a sort of restoration bedroom comedy farce ever. And I always like to sort of try and bring in little genres whenever I'm writing. So there is a sort of bedroom farce scene in the book, you know, quick, my husband, get in the cupboard. Wait a moment, this is my house. You get in the cupboard. Okay, you know, this sort of stuff. And it all gets very, very silly. And then people turn up at the door and, you know, what's going on? And then people are running past in the background. And it's like, hey, wait a moment, shouldn't so and so, and you know, quick, down the drain pipe. So it was just me having a lot of fun with that kind of silliness that I kind of, I just like experimentation and mucking around with different genres. And yeah, and the idea of, you know, quick, hide in the cupboard, you know, all this sort of silly stuff was actually great fun. So yeah, there's a lot of little sections in it I love, but yeah, that was I think that was probably my favorite.
Excellent. So before I move on to the audience questions, just a reminder, if you tuned in late here on Facebook Live, as soon as the video is done, you can watch it from the beginning right here on the same live tab. It'll be archived. Or if you give me a couple of days, I'll get it up on YouTube, list on social media, tag the authors, all of that. So if you have friends who don't have Facebook and they want to watch the video, it'll be public on YouTube. So we do have some questions. Let's see. So sorry, scrolling. Okay, so Sarah would like to know, what is your favorite and least favorite part of writing? Is it the first draft, brainstorming, revising, etc.?
My favorite is the first draft. That's the bit that always stays the same in some ways. And you know, whatever stage you're at in your career, or whether you're unpublished or published, the actual act of writing a first draft is quite the same. And it's not always fun, obviously, but those moments where you actually know the book, you sort of more than halfway through the book, you're trying to get it down as fast as possible before it sort of falls out of your ears and you forget it. Yeah, that moment of pure writing, and you're the only person who's read it so far, and it's all yours, and you know, no one's cast their eyes on it. That for me is the best, where you feel like you've got a secret that you want to share with the world, and you're just sort of finishing off a first draft. And then editing, not such a fan of, but that first draft, yeah.
Jasper?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, it's when you've you've actually got to it being in one lump. It's not finished yet, but you know that there is a book there, and any doubts that it wasn't going to work are dispelled, and it's a nice, easy sort of downhill slope to getting it finished and having a final draft. I think that's probably the most exciting. I do like that, you know, editing process at the end, because you add little jokes and you add sort of nuance, and it all starts to sort of pile up a bit. So I think that's my favorite bit. The least favorite bit is kind of 2/3 the way through the book, where it doesn't really work, and the logjam starts, and you get to this point where you go, okay, I'm 70,000 words in. I kind of vaguely know how it ends, but I don't know how we're going to get our characters to the end. And it just sort of suddenly gets a bit logjammy. But I also know that you kind of have to jump on the logs with the big spike, you know, like they do in Canada. And then you start heave away at these things. And after 2 or 3 weeks of this, you go, oh, okay, no, I get it now. And I know where it's going to go from here. But there's that moment, you know, and I think when you get blocked, you're stuck in that moment, and you're in the middle of that frozen lake in Canada, and they're all stuck fast. And no matter what you do, you just cannot shift them. So I think, you know, it's very close to being blocked, but it's that little sort of stalling period, I think, that I dislike the most.
All right, so Maria would love to know what kinds of books both of you have on the back burner, and she would especially like to know if there's a sequel to Jasper Fforde Shades of Grey. And Jasper, just so you know, we have someone wanting to know about a sequel for all your books. So can you just run down Shades of Grey, Thursday Next? Are we going to see any of these people again? Because they all want to know. I'm preempting further questions.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so what I'm doing is I thought, right, what I do is I write a standalone book in this bizarre, strange, wonderful world, and then of course I write a series about it. So, but every single series began with a standalone. You know, the Air Affair and Shades of Grey and Last Dragon Slayer. They're all standalones. Anyway, so at the moment I'm working on Dragon Slayer 4. Right, which I want to finish, because I want to finish a series. I've never finished a series. It could be very exciting for me. I don't know about that. And after that, because I just want to finish the series now, because I turn 60 next year, and I thought I better start finishing series here just in case, hedging my bets. So what I'm going to do is Dragon Slayer 4, Shades of Grey 2, which will be next year, and then Thursday Next 8. Which will be hopefully the year after, although if Shades of Grey takes maybe 18 months to write, then that will push back TN8. But that's what I want to do. And then once I'm done with my series, you know, basically everything's kind of wrapped up, and then I can just muck around with standalones or short stories, or get some other stuff out that's been sitting on the back burner for a while.
Wonderful. Matt, what are you working on?
I've just sort of finished the first draft for a non-fiction book, which is a very short book, and it's just called The Comfort Book. And it's what I was writing in sort of March, April, May this year, as the world really seemed to be going into a collective breakdown. And it was just things I was writing to myself, or quotes I was finding, or little bits of Buddhist philosophy or Hindu philosophy that was inspiring me and keeping me vaguely sane. And it's just it's what it says on the tin. It's just a load of things, kind of finding comfort within the sort of tumultuous times. And I'm also writing another children's book within the sort of Christmas book, because I've got A Boy Called Christmas, that film, coming out next year, and I'm writing a book about one of the characters who's a mouse. So there's a book called A Mouse Called Mika, which is going to be out next year for children.
Wonderful. So Winnie would like to know, with this is basically in reference to Jasper Fforde fans asking constantly about the publishing of books. How do published, established writers such as yourselves cope with expectations of the readers, the publishers, or your own expectations?
There's quite a complex relationship between the reader and the writer. There's first of all, I think there's a compact. You know, what's happening here is that you are giving me your hard-earned money, and in return, I am obligated to entertain you. The obligation to entertain does not have to be in any way that you're going to expect. In fact, it can be in a way that you do not expect. So the interesting thing about writing and writing series for people where you have an expectation is that not only do you want to wrong foot people in a nice and amusing and non-aggressive way, but you can actually play on the expectations, and you can actually create bizarrely this kind of weird sort of narrative going on where, that is just what they're going to expect me to do, so I'm going to do something subtly different. And if you've read the Thursday Next series, and you have an idea about which way they can go, then actually there's ways in which I can play with the narrative to a reader who actually has read the entire book. So you kind of, yes, the expectation is there, but and it's very important to obviously, come up with, to oblige what you're meant to be doing, but don't feel pressured to do exactly kind of what people are expecting. Do something slightly unusual, slightly different, keep people guessing, pull out other stops, take a few rabbits out of the hat, and yeah, nothing up the sleeves, and just and have a bit of fun with this strange relationship that you've established with readers.
Matt?
Yeah, I'd second that. I mean, I didn't really feel that weight of expectation until I wrote a book called Reasons to Stay Alive, which was very well, it's my most successful book in the UK, #1 bestseller and everything, and it was great to happen, but it was a non-fiction book, and I see myself as a fiction author primarily, and I felt the weight of sort of certainly publisher expectation and some reader expectation in terms of following up that with another non-fiction book about mental health. And the book I wrote after that was A Boy Called Christmas, which was set in a fantasy version of Finland and was totally not what anyone was expecting from me. And I feel like occasionally you need to sort of make your own space creatively so you feel relatively free from that expectation. You obviously want to take readers with you and to listen to readers and accept readers, but also to have enough faith in yourself as a writer that hopefully readers will like what you're doing without them necessarily knowing that they'll like what you're doing when you're doing it, if that makes sense.
Sure. We have a very quick question for you, Matt. Creamy or chunky peanut butter?
Well, it depends. I used to always answer chunky, but recently there's a brand called Pip and Nut who do a very good smooth. I don't know if they have it in America, but they do an exceptionally good smooth. So I'm a late convert in my mid-40s to the smooth cause. So yeah, smooth peanut butter's winning me over still.
Yeah, we're a double peanut butter household. I'm chunky, husband's creamy. So.
How do you get along? I mean, it's the fact. I mean, my wife likes marzipan and I hate it, so it's a similar sort of thing. But we actually have imported Jif super crunchy peanut butter from the States because it is the best.
It is. That's what we have in the pantry right here. That's my peanut butter. But he has we're brand loyalists, Jiffy, but he goes creamy. So there you go. We have a lot of questions along the same theme. What authors or types of books do you read when you're wanting to relax, or have you read anything great lately? So any authors you want to talk about or books that you've loved recently?
Well, I'm going to go a bit unconventional, and it's not fiction. I read a book by an American Tibetan Buddhist, Pema Chodron, called When Things Fall Apart this year, which I don't like the cover. It's got a really terrible sort of cheesy cover, which looks like it's from another era. But I found it really useful in terms of Buddhist philosophy of accepting uncertainty as part of life and resisting that idea that we have to be happy all the time and we have these expectations for ourselves. So I'd just recommend that as a sort of 2020 coping mechanism when things fall apart. So help me this year. Sounds
like we could all use that. How about you, Jasper?
Yeah, I mean, I think about writing, and I used to work in the film industry. It's similar with that. Is that when you're a writer, you know very quickly if you're in bad hands, and so I find myself rejecting books very quickly. If I read a chapter and I go, no, this is terrible. I mean, it really is bad. So I do not have a lot of time for books that are really not very good. So I tend to go out the window. But when you get a book that works, it shines with a far, far higher luster, because you know just how hard it is to finesse a book into doing and saying what you want it to do. It's really, really hard. So when a book comes along, and I read a book last year that is still the last good book I read, and this was True Grit by Charles Portis, which is kind of a Western, but it's not really a Western. It's all manner of things. It's about love and vengeance and all manner of wonderful things. And it was made into a very good film by the Coens with Hailey Steinfeld, who was just brilliant in it. And the book is every bit as good as a film. If you've seen the film, read the book, and it's like, it just comes alive in another entirely different way. But it's just beautiful, and the dialogue and everything. It's just a fabulous piece of work from the very first page. Straight away you go bang. I'm in good hands. Lead on, I'll follow. It's that kind of novel.
Yeah. So I think we have reached time. I'm going to take the honor of last question as one to end on. Both of you clearly throughout your writing have a love of books. And I was wondering if there's a story or where your love for books came from as a young person.
Well, I was suspicious of books for a long time, because even though I'd liked books as a child, my mum was a head teacher, and my experience at school was that books were these things that are meant to do you good, that they're this kind of whole grain, earnest thing, which is suspiciously good for you. And obviously books can be that, but it was actually a teacher I had at my senior school, secondary school, called Mrs. Kurzweil, who really, even though she was a teacher, she really made me understand books as a thing which is a form of entertainment, as thrilling, as explosive as any movie or video game. And a book can be essentially what you want it to be. And it was through her recommendations, a lot of S.E. Hinton, and then getting into your Stephen Kings and your James Herberts, your Frank Herberts, all kinds of different people that got me engaged and excited about books around that sort of age, 13, 14.
Wonderful. Jasper?
I mean, it's not just books, it's story. I mean, I've just been fascinated by story and the smoke and mirrors. That's what attracted me to the movie industry, is that on one side of the film set, it was like a bit of ply and 2x1 and this plaster, and on the other side it looked like stone. That kind of magic of creating something from nothing, I think, was a very, very sort of attractive proposition. Book-wise, I remember sort of the first, if you think about it, the first books that you read, you're told to read. They're like reading primers. But I remember suddenly realizing that I had this thing I could do, which was reading. So I thought, oh, I could go and find a book and read it. This is, whoa, it's an exciting moment in my life. And I went to my parents' library. I mean, not that they had a room with a library in it. It was just like a, stack of books. And I sort of tried to find something. And my dad was an economist, so they were sort of, books about economy, which weren't terribly interesting to a sort of 5-year-old. But I found a copy of Alice in Wonderland, and I went, aha, it's got pictures, it's got dialogue, how bad can this be? And I went and read it, and then I thought, this is really, really good. This is magical, this is transformatory, and I read it again, and then, started reading, and then got big into reading and story, science fiction in particular, when I was at school. And I was someone who was sort of went to boarding school, and I was someone who was kind of sort of quite happy with my own company. I did not like, doing sort of sports and all that nonsense. And I used to find my way in the library and discovered, authors like Nicholas Fisk, who wrote some really, really excellent science fiction books for children. And I kind of devoured them, and the love of story and movies and theatre just sort of came on from there. And I had to work in the film industry. That's all I wanted to do, and then eventually became a writer. I just loved stories, loved make-believe, smoke and mirrors. It's magic. It's kind of magic.
Well, I think we are all grateful for both of your love of books and stories. Again, we have signed book plates coming from Matt Haig. We have these postcards that are signed and dated and stamped from Jasper to go along with the books. The new books are The Constant Rabbit and The Midnight Library. Highly recommended. Thank you so much, gentlemen. We really appreciate your time and best wishes. Have a wonderful evening.
You too. Thanks so much for that. Thank you. Bye, Jasper. Thanks.
Of course. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.